I can hear nothing. I've heard no sound.
Hello, Mr. Johnson.
I can hear whoever that is. Chris. Awesome. Where are we at for quorum?
Hi, Minister. Just checking that you can hear us now.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Madam Clerk, we need one more for quorum with Caitlin and Lisa as alternates. Who are we expecting?
Both Mr. Jacobson and Miss Whalen Armstrong are in the process of calling in, and Miss Knockleby is on her way in town.
Awesome, thank you, Minister. We will get started as soon as one of those three people show up. Good afternoon, everyone. I will call this meeting of the Standing Committee on Economic Environment to order. Review and adoption of agenda. Today we have a public hearing on the Geoscience and Professional Engineering Act. MLA Cleveland, can I ask you move the agenda? Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you invite everyone into the room? And Emily Knockleby, may I pass the chair over to you?
If I can breathe. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was just coming in from the inspection with Jane, and thank you, Minister, for that. It was good. Come on in. Whew. So have you called the meeting to order? No. Okay. So I'm going to call this meeting of the Standing Committee, thank you, on Economic Development and Environment to order. Sorry again for being late. I appreciate everybody's patience. I will start with asking if there is someone who would like to do the prayer this morning. Maybe perhaps since we're running a little bit late, I will forego the prayer this morning, given that that's something we do fairly regularly anyway, so everyone will keep those things in mind. Do you want to do the prayer? Okay, MLA Cleveland will do the prayer. Thank you.
Creator, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of community for all the residents of the Northwest Territories. Amen.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. So we have we're going to review and adopt the agenda. Madam Clerk, would you like to do that?
Thank you. On the agenda for today, a public hearing regarding Bill 93, where the committee will hear from Minister Archie as well as representatives from NAPEG, as well going into committee business in camera after the public hearing. And the committee may wish to add to the agenda consideration of some correspondence from the Government House Leader and work planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as amended? MLA Cleveland, thank you. Conflicts of interest will be declared as and when. And I think that is everything, and we are ready to go live. So, the shadows. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to this public meeting of the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. My name is Katrina Knockley and I am the MLA for Great Slave and I am the acting chair of this committee. Today, committee is holding a public hearing about Bill 93, Practice of Engineering, Geoscience and Applied Science Technology Act. Bill 93 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly and was referred to this committee to review on June 2nd, 2023. Bill 93 is sponsored by the Minister of Infrastructure. In this bill, the Government of the Northwest Territories proposes to repeal and replace the existing Engineer and Geoscience Professions Act. Bill 93 will provide for a new framework for the practice of professionals in engineering, geoscience, and applied science technology, including for continuing professional development and discipline. It is committee's job to review the government's bill and make sure it is the best piece of legislation possible for the wants and needs of the people of the NWT. The reason committee is holding this public hearing today is to hear more about the bill both from the minister and from other stakeholders. If there's anyone in the room that wishes to speak during this hearing, please speak to our committee staff and they will get you on the list. I would like to remind all members and witnesses to direct all questions and comments to myself as chair and to wait to be recognized before speaking to help us have a smooth meeting. Please note this meeting is being live streamed. I will now ask members to introduce themselves for the record, starting with the MLA in the room.
Thank you very much, Caitlin Cleveland, Cam Lake.
Thank you, and to the members online.
Jane Wayellen Armstrong, MLA for Moultrie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Alan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, and I will now pass it over to the Minister of Infrastructure for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to start by good afternoon, Chair, committee members. I welcome the opportunity to participate in committee's public hearing of Bill 93, the Practice of Engineering, Geoscience, and Applied Science Technology Act. So with me today from the Department of Infrastructure is Allison Scott, who's Director of Policy, Planning, and Communication, as well as Mark Cronk, who's Director of Design and Technical Services. I'd also like to recognize Ian Rennie, who's Legal Counsel with the Department of Justice. Also in the back, off the witness table, I believe we have Susan Martin, who's Manager of Legislative Affairs, We have Celeste McKay, who is Assistant Deputy Minister for Asset Management, and Robert Jenkins, Assistant Deputy Minister for Energy and Strategic Initiatives. I believe I also have my ministerial advisor, Robert Collinson, on the line with me. So Bill 93 was introduced in Legislative Assembly in May 2023 to replace NAPEG's establishing law, the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Act. This new act continues NAPEG as the professional regulator for engineers and geoscientists in the territory, while giving it new powers and responsibility. Many of these changes came at NAPEG's own request, while others are modeled on recent changes to professional governance across Canada. So the department and NAPEG have worked closely together over the last year to prepare this bill. NAPEG also regulates engineers and geoscience in Nunavut. The department's staff have met with counterparts in that territory. So the new act will support improved public safety by requiring engineers to do periodic training throughout their careers. It will also improve accountability by adding lay members to NAPEG's discipline committee and requiring online publication of decision. It'll modernize discipline of registrants by allowing NAPEG to order training or supervision instead of terminating an engineer's license. It'll make it easier for engineers to move to the north by removing that red tape from recognition of foreign credentials. And it would also make it easier for individuals to keep their engineering credentials while returning from parental leave. By making NAPEG the regulator of engineering technologists and technicians in the NWT, this act resolves another public safety issue. These occupants do an important work alongside engineers, but they are not currently regulated. So I'd like to thank the chair and standing committee for agreeing to review this bill in a shorter timer than what our normal protocol dictates. So I believe we've got staff and we can answer any questions that committee may have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. For myself, I was very happy to help move this bill along, and it's really good to see everybody in the room and be amongst some of my former peers. So I'm going to pass it over to MLA Cleveland to start us off with questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My first question is, it's my understanding that this piece of legislation, because NAPEG covers Nunavut as well, covers both the NWT and Nunavut. And so I'm wondering if there's been any engagement with legislators over in Nunavut, or if there's been any feedback that's been received from Nunavut either. Thank you so much.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Madam Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, yes, that is correct. We had So the Department of Infrastructure has reached out to Nunavut, informed some of the engineers of the new bill, and the government of Nunavut has also been informed about the bill, and the department will be open to answer any questions that they may have.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Your staff is indicating they would like to respond, if you're good with that.
Okay, thanks for that, Madam Chair. Sure.
Please go
Allison?
ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Allison. So just to add to what the minister already shared, over the course of developing the legislative proposal as well as the amendments, we did engage with Nunavut on several occasions. However, we, on some occasions, did not receive much in the way of response. So we have reached out to them to provide them with copies of the LP. We've provided them with the bill. We also provided sample drafting that we felt they could use, because they do have to make an amendment to incorporate certain pieces into their own act. So we have been in touch with them in early stages. They knew generally where we were headed, but we haven't received any recent feedback from them on the bill. That said, there are several provisions in the bill that will come into force over a period of time. And so NAPEG itself will be in a position to work with Nunavut and the members within that territory to ensure readiness for those sorts of things. And then we would bring that forward for the minister to recommend coming into force to the commissioner when the time is right. So I hope that answers the question. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. MLA Cleveland?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my next question is in regards to the expansion of scope of Bill 93 and how it includes the self-regulating powers by adding, the engineering technologists and technicians within there as well. And I'm wondering if the department can speak to whether or not they have heard in any of their consultation or engagement on this piece of legislation from people within that field, or if there are any concerns from NAPEG as far as the impact this might have to administration. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Madam Minister?
I guess I have to take my mute off.
Yes.
So I believe the question is, how is the department addressing tensions with technologists and engineers? So a section of this bill relating to technologists and technicians will not come into effect until NAPEG demonstrates that it has its bylaws in place to govern technologists while also respecting some of their concerns. And Madam Chair, if anyone in my department wants to add anything further, if I can pass it on to Allison, just to clarify things.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Yes, Ms. Scott, go ahead, please.
Again, I can just add a little bit more about our engagement with technologists. So because the technologists are not currently regulated within territory, the department did face some challenges with reaching out to that sector. There's no established professional organization for us to contact to say, hey, how many are there? Are there 30? Are there 5? Are there 150? So that was a little bit of an interesting thing we had to try to undertake. But what we did do is we reached out to the engineering firms operating in the territory. I believe there are 6. We also reached out to the regulator in Alberta, as well as to the Alberta government to try to get some information and some general response about technologists and to identify if there were any key concerns that came from that group. Of course, the department also employs a number of technologists as well. Mark has a few that report to him, I believe. And what we didn't get a great response back in terms of volume. We heard back from about 3 firms, and the indication there was generally supportive, but also indicated some confusion. There was some confusion where they believed that they were already regulated through the government of Alberta, which is not the case, and probably something we felt we should address, which is why we decided to proceed with developing the regulation, the amendments. So yes, and then the other piece that I think kind of speaks to addressing that particular element is because we had this challenge identifying and communicating with that group. That's why some of these provisions don't come into force until such time as NAPEG has developed their program essentially to regulate that group, and they develop their bylaws. So again, those sections would come into force upon recommendation from the minister, which essentially means that NAPEG would provide us with information about how they engaged with that sector, how those conversations went, and an indication that all the players were on board, so to speak, before we would recommend that comes into force. So, and really, that could take quite some time. So,
thank you, Ms. Scott. I don't have anyone else putting their hand up, so MLA Cleveland, go ahead.
Thank you for that. So that was going to be my next question, was in regards to kind of the expected timelines on those regulations. Does the department have an idea of when those might be completed and be implemented? Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe I'll get Allison to speak a little bit more to some of the timelines. Thanks,
Sure.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Scott.
Within the Act, there's several provisions that will come into force upon proclamation, and then there's several that come into force down the road. And so these particular pieces actually won't be addressed in regulation. They would be addressed in NAPEG's bylaws around the technologists. So they need to do their work internally. That's a pretty typical process. It's pretty atypical for a government to have regulations when it comes to professional regulatory bodies, including, lawyers, engineers, that sort of thing. So this is a very common approach. So NAPEG will develop their bylaws. We've had some early conversations with them, particularly around the technologist piece, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn if I say it could take 1 to 2 years. It just depends on how that progresses. There's other pieces in the Act that will come into force in time as well regarding professional ongoing training and professional development. Those will come into force a bit sooner, but that could be more like 3 to 6 months or something along those lines. Again, that program needs to be developed internally by the regulator. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. I'm just going to jump in because I want to clarify one thing in case, is that the technicians and technologists, while they're not regulated by the government of Alberta, they are regulated by APEGA, which is the regulator in Alberta. Is that correct, Ms. Scott?
No, not quite. So the technologists in the territory are not regulated by Alberta's body, but within Alberta, they have 2 regulatory organizations. One is APEGA. They regulate the engineers, geoscientists, etc. And then ASSET is the organization that regulates technologists. So Alberta actually has 2 organizations that provide the regulation for these sectors. Yeah. They don't regulate power.
Right, so currently they are regulated if they're operating in Alberta. There is no cooperative agreement between the territory and Alberta. I just wanted to clarify that because I think there might be some issues that people think people are kind of operating without any sort of oversight, and that is not the case. And also just to clarify that professional development has always been something that NAPEG has been doing. This is just to tighten up the regulations around it. So I'm going to pass it back to MLA Cleveland if she has a follow-up.
Yeah, just one more follow-up. And one of the other questions I'd asked previous was just if NAPEG has any concerns about the administrative impact of the added scope and like the need for bylaws, or have indicated whether or not they need any kind of additional support from the GNWT in order to implement the pieces of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Madam Minister?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So some of the new kinds of disciplinary actions that NAPEG will be able to order. So the fine, suspension, termination. So this act will start allowing NAPEG to customize disciplinary by requiring courses, supervision, limited practice, or treatment for disability. And Madam Chair, I don't know if I've answered MLA Cleveland's question, but other than to say that that some of the things that NAPEG are able to do. I can pass it to Allison if she wants to.
Thank you. And just so the public knows, we will hear from NAPEG after this, so they can also answer some of these questions. Please go ahead, Ms. Scott.
So again, I hope I'm not speaking too out of turn, but our understanding is NAPEG is generally supportive. Many of the amendments that we have developed in this act were actually at their request. So we were really responding to a lot of issues that they had identified within their own ease of operation and within the industry. So a lot of what we have put together here is really in response to their needs. So as a result, I would expect that their ability to administer is something they've thought about. And of course, I mean, over the last sort of 18 months that we've been working together with them on developing the repeal and replacement, I think we've established a pretty good working relationship, and we would be certainly available to continue providing support and advice as they go forward. Yeah.
Thank you for that. MLA Cleveland, do you have any follow-up? No. I don't see any other questions from members online. I myself don't have any questions, as I'm pretty familiar with the conversation that's happened here. So I just want to thank the Minister and her staff for appearing in front of us here today. It was a pleasure to have you and see the engineers again. And again, thank you for allowing me to go on the tour earlier, Minister. That delayed a bit the start of this meeting. So I do appreciate that. It was good to get out there and put my steel toes and my hard hat back on. So we'll just take a few minutes here while we change out our witnesses. Thank you.
Okay, Queen Aini.
Thank you so much for bearing with us. We return now to our meeting with the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. And in front of us today, now we have NAPEG, who is here to talk about their bill, or NAPEG, depending how you like to say it. So I am going to pass this over to Vince McCormick, the Registrar of NAPEG, to get started, and he can introduce the others with him. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm Vince McCormick, Executive Director, Registrar of NAPEG. With me today, I have Ms. Melanie Williams, PN. She is our current president of NAPEG. And to my right is Mr. Brian George, retired engineer and a longtime consultant with a long history in mechanical engineering in the territory. And Mr. Hendrik Falk is a professional geoscientist, and he works for ITI and also has a very long and distinguished career and multiple honors and awards. If with the chair's indulgence, we have a very short presentation we'd like to give you.
That would be great. And when you need to advance slides, just let us know and the clerk will do so.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. There we go. That's doing okay. That's perfect. Yeah, if I could just have the next slide, please. One more. So I think we're on highlights. So the force of the thrust of the questions that we had asked, and the reason we'd looking for some updates is our main part of our mandate is the protection of the public. And that includes physical safety, economic health of the public and territory as well. Some of the things we've specifically want to look at changing. We're changing the definition of members, so everybody would be a member versus a member and a licensee, and we will reserve the licensee designation for another purpose that I'll get to shortly, and that would include the limited scope of practice category. We've asked to increase sanctions for disciplinary matters. Mainly that's because our act was getting rather long in the tooth, so we're kind of falling behind inflation in terms of that, and we have a little bit of experience where we think we need a little bit better deterrent, and so we've asked for that. And we wanted to, we could have in bylaws developed sanctions for continuing professional development, or rules for continuing professional development, which we have, but we thought it was important for the perception of the public and to reinforce to our members that it's taken very seriously by the people of the territories and by our association. And the other main, one of the main things we want to ask for was registrant and training mobility, which was just an oversight in the previous act. Next slide, please. So all registrants will be members from now on, including those who live in the territories and those who live in the south. This eliminates residence-based distinction for registration purposes. We hope it's going to encourage volunteer involvement from registrants who live outside of the territory and get a little more input. Many of those people work up here, obviously work up here to be registered with us, but they've tended not to raise their voice and get involved, and it's only recently we've got a few people involved, so we want to get them more involved in committees and bring a more diversity of opinion into the territory. It will promote fairness by allowing all members to vote in council elections. As it stands now, only members resident in the NWT or Nunavut are allowed to vote, so this will give members living outside of the territory the right to vote here. However, we will maintain a residence requirement that members of council will need to be residents of the NWT and Nunavut so that we still have that northern flavor and control. Next slide, please. New membership categories based on scope of practice. Promotes mobility under the Canada Free Trade Agreement. Sorry, I had the old AIT reference in the slide, but it's now the Canada Free Trade Agreement. So this will help us or allow us to recognize limited practice licenses that are offered by other provinces and territories that we don't have here. So that'll just allow us to provide mobility to those people. In addition, it will enhance fair registration practices by facilitating internationally trained professionals working in the territories. They are able to become licensed and work here now. However, there are certain types of foreign trained professionals who have quite a limited scope of practice. So as it stands now, we're not able to give them a broad engineering or geoscience license. With a limited scope, we're able to recognize their professional expertise and allow them to practice within their defined scope. And this will allow, also we're hoping to allow the future ability to register applied science technologists and allow them to be responsible for work in a specified scope of practice that does not require certification by a professional engineer or geoscientist. Engineering is a broad umbrella. It encompasses a very broad range of practices, and the way we operate now is obviously anything that requires an engineering certification seal must be done by a professional engineer, but we recognize in terms of economics and hiring ability in the territory that there are some things that don't require professional engineering, and we want to recognize people who have qualifications and experience to be able to do those things. We'll also not abdicating the responsibility of professionals to oversee work. Next slide, please. We've asked for changes to the discipline process in conjunction with the department and the minister. We're strongly in support of the ability of the minister to appoint up to 2 members of the public to the discipline committee. We believe this will enhance public confidence and transparency of the organization. We've asked for the ability to dismiss frivolous complaints before an investigation committee is formed. The way the legislation is written right now, anytime a complaint comes in, the chair of the discipline committee reviews it and strikes an investigative committee. This will give the chair of the discipline committee the opportunity to dismiss frivolous or vexatious complaints before doing that and getting other people involved in it. We're asking for the explicit authorization to publish disciplinary findings. By way of history, we had been operating under legal opinions that told us under the current legislation we could not. We do have a recent legal opinion that tells us yes, we can, just based on the way the world has changed, and this is how things should be done in the modern world of regulation. However, we still think it's important that it's explicitly laid out in an act so that there's no misunderstanding. And part of that as well, change is the increase in monetary penalties just to discourage further unethical and unprofessional conduct and to reflect inflation since the original act came in. In terms of the publication, we do intend, just for the committee and the chair's information, to publish all decisions in summary version on our website. But beyond our website, we're also looking for authority to publish in newspapers where that's required. If something particularly egregious has come to our attention and we think it's important to protect the interests of the public and their safety, then we'd like to be able to put those findings in newspapers, and perhaps down the road enter an agreement with an organization such as canley.org to be able to have those published on the web in a broader sense. Next slide, please. We do have technically mandatory continuing professional development CPD now. However, we did ask for it to be explicitly laid out in the Act so there is no uncertainty among our membership, and just to give it that heft that the government and the people of the Northwest Territories consider this important, and NAPE considers this very important. All major professions have continuing professional development requirements, and engineering is certainly one where it's important because of the pace of change of technology can overtake especially some of our emerging disciplines. So it's important that we're able to keep up with that, and members demonstrate that. And also, the new Act would give us explicit authority to include members who do not comply within our discipline processes right now. Again, we just think this is an important facet of our public safety and protection of the public mandate, and we think it's important in that regard. Next slide, please. The last sort of main important change that we want to bring up was registrant and training mobility. The way the current act is written, and we've gone out and got legal opinions on it, is we are not able to bring registrants in, or as they're called now, engineers in training or geoscientists in training, as engineers or GITs in training with NAPEG. The way it's written right now, if they're at such a stage in their career that their academics have been approved by another regulatory organization in Canada, we're not allowed to accept that. We have to send them to our board of examiners, which is APEGA. So they would have to go through all that process again. So we don't think that's fair to them, and we don't think it helps promote mobility into the territory, because we want these young engineers and geoscientists coming here and feeling welcomed here and hopefully becoming professionals and staying here. So just removing that last barrier, I think, is very important. So I think that's all we have for you. We want to keep it very brief. Those are the main highlights that we had, and we'd be happy to take any questions that the committee has, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm sitting along, nodding along to pretty much everything that you said, so it's good to see this, and really to see the collaboration between your organization and the department to move this forward, and as the minister said, on a sped up timeline, so thank you for that. MLA Cleveland, do you have a question?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, I asked the department a question about any concerns to do with the administrative impacts of changes to the legislation, and if there are any, and if NAPEG would be able to address that. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Mr. McCormick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, to answer Emily's question, there will be some impacts to our organization. One of the reasons why we're having coming to enforce provisions in this bill is it's going to take us some time to update our bylaws and put policies and procedures in place. So there's going to be some upfront administration work, which we haven't had a chance to do yet, not knowing what was going to be included in the bill for sure or not, what would pass. In particular around the applied science technologist piece, we need to develop areas of practice where they might be able to practice without direct supervision of an engineer. We're a little bit different than, say, the medical field, where people understand, doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, LPNs. We don't have hard cutoffs. Okay, well, here's clearly a demarcation line. So there's going to be a fair bit of work that has to be done by our professional committees to determine where that cutoff might be, because almost every system in integration sense is integrated. So, in terms of administrative workload, we have heard from the Alberta regulator for techs that they only have less than 40 licensed in both territories. So unless there's been a large change in the last year or so, then I don't think the sheer volume is going to cause us a problem, but it's going to be just doing it right and making sure we're fair to everybody and we have processes in place.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. MLA Cleveland, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you very much, and thank you for that answer. My next question is just in regards to the fact that NAPEG serves both the NWT and Nunavut. Are there any concerns about legislation potentially coming forward that isn't a mirror legislation and NAPEG having to administer two separate pieces of legislation? Or has NAPEG heard any feedback from our sister territory in regards to these changes? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Mr. McCormick?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. I wouldn't say we have concerns, but there's always a possibility that there could be some differential legislation if Nunavut likes or doesn't like parts of the NWT legislation. We have consulted with our own members, and we have Nunavut members on our council, so they're aware of what's happening, but we have not engaged directly with the government in Nunavut ourselves. It was decided early on in the process that the Department of Infrastructure would lead direct consultations with their peers in the government in Nunavut, and we would be available to answer questions from anybody who needed them.
Thank you for that. I should also just point out to the public listening that us as a regular member committee, the AOC committee has started conversations about having a bit more of a proactive, collaborative conversation ongoing with Nunavut over shared legislation. So that is something that would affect this type of a bill as well. So I just wanted to point out that we're trying to get more proactive on our end as well to talk about our shared legislation, so we're not either doing things differently and we're not reinventing the wheel. MLA Cleveland, did you have any more? Okay. I have a quick question if everyone would indulge me. I'm not seeing anyone else online piping up. There's a conversation around the committee for the discipline committee, and I know always within NAPEG, it's, you know, or any organization, I should say, in the North, it's tough to get people to sign up for things, and I know we've struggled in the past, or NAPEG has struggled in the past to have lay people on council. There's already one requirement for one. I guess I have concern about what does the discipline, or the sort of the structure or composition of the discipline committee look like? How does NAPEG ensure that, you know, it is representative of the people of the Northwest Territories versus just a certain demographic, which we struggle with in our profession to not always have only one demographic represented. And I'm trying to be as diplomatic because I know it's nobody's fault in this room, but we do struggle with diversity and inclusion. So maybe Mr. McCormick, if you don't mind speaking a bit to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not at all. Yes, we have a bit of a demographic problem. For one thing, the discipline committee has been fairly old, to be blunt. Partly that's because people tend not to stick their hand up and volunteer for it unless they consider themselves to be seasoned professionals. They don't want to put themselves out there. So we have made some strides lately in getting some younger members. We have a couple of female members as well, which would be nice to have another one or two. And perhaps we can address that with lay members if we can find them as well. And we also try to keep a balance between professional geoscientists and professional engineers. Most of the complaints we receive are from the engineering side because they seem to be more public facing. However, it's important to have both professions represented, so there's professional expertise and a broader diversity of opinion. So it's, I guess in short, it's something we're trying to address, but as you've mentioned, it is quite hard sometimes. Thank you.
Yes, I would agree, and I'm glad to hear the comment that, you know, the lack of that diversity could then be made up with the lay members, and that you're thinking in that realm. I should say, though, to point out on behalf of NAPEG that we have had more than our fair share of women always on council and a female president. So for having not that many women working in the profession in the North, we do actually have a lot of women that are involved in the organization. So I don't want to give that impression that that's not the case. Mr. George, did you want to add to that?
The discipline committee is, by its nature, somewhat secretive. It's an investigative committee. It doesn't actually decide cases. So what it's investigating, we sort of keep secret from council, and it's on council where our lay public members are. So they don't actually get to see what's going on in the investigative committee. So that's why we thought it important. And the reason council can't be on the investigative committee is because if it goes to a hearing, the members of council will become the judge and juries. So the investigative committee is, again, this opaque box that no one can see in. And we thought it important that we get some public members in there to see into it.
Thank you, and I actually think that's a really good point to make. Thank you, and probably one I wasn't aware of really distinguishing when I think about it, because we all sit in the various different roles, and I never remember who's on council at this point, and who's now on these committees. So I'm not sure if there were other questions from other members, anyone online that I've missed in the chat. No, again, I just want to reiterate that I think this is a great piece of legislation. It's long needed. I remember being here 15 years ago as a new engineer, getting involved with the association and hearing the need for the changes even back then. So it's been a long time in coming. And I like this. I'm kind of nerding out about it all because this is how it's supposed to happen, and it's really great to see. I almost laugh that you know, you're too honest in saying that now it's an opaque box, but that's what engineers are. We're a little too honest and blunt sometimes, so, as everyone is aware from my time in office. So at that note, we were going to go in camera after we conclude here. I don't believe there are any members of the public here today that want to speak, so we will wrap up our public portion of the meeting. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate everyone coming today. Thanks.